Okay, thank you everybody for coming. And I want to welcome everybody here for a very special episode we have of Eastpointe Movie Critic Discussion Night. I'm Ed Katz, and for those of you who don't know, I was the theater and film critic for WICC Radio in Connecticut for a couple of years. I was a film major at Syracuse, and my day job is I do marketing and PR, but this is my night job. Not yet. All right, so be sure. So if you're on Zoom, everyone is muted except for Brent, which is great, and I'll give an intro for him in just a second. If you want to speak up and ask a question, I'll give everyone an opportunity. I have a couple of questions for Brent first, and then I'll open it up to the floor. And as usual, we always do is when we talk about a film, and this is Sing Sing from 2000. It's 2023, but also 2024. I kept seeing it in both places, but we'll cover
exactly.
It. Right. So, who liked the film? Show of hands. Okay. Anyone not like the film? No. Okay. Anyone kind of in the middle on the fence? Okay, a couple. All right, a couple. Okay, good. We could talk about that. Okay, good. And all right, so this film has a 97% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, not only from the critics, but from audiences as well. And Rotten Tomatoes' summary is it's a moving celebration of art's redemptive power. Sing Sing draws an estimable emotional resonance from a never better Coleman Domingo and equally impressive ensemble players. The budget was about $2 million. That sound about right? Production budget?
Right. Yeah, low budget.
And the box office was, I saw two different accounts. One said 5.1 million, one said 5.3 worldwide, with 3.1 million being from North America.
That's about right.
Okay. Good. All right. So I want to do an intro for a very special guest, Brent Buell. So Brent's real life work helped inspire the powerful story that we'll be talking about. Brent is a playwright, producer, director, and novelist, and the co-producer and story consultant of Sing Sing. And for 10 years, Brent directed theater inside New York's maximum security prisons through the groundbreaking program Rehabilitation Through the Arts. If you saw RTA referenced in the film, that's what it was referring to. Mm-hmm. His productions from Of Mice and Men to original works by incarcerated individuals received critical acclaim, including praise from the New York Times. One of those productions, his original comedy, Breakin' the Mummy's Code, which premiered inside Sing Sing, was the direct inspiration for the film Sing Sing, directed by Greg Kwedar, and starring Coleman Domingo and Clarence Macklin. Brent's role in that story is portrayed by Oscar nominee Paul Raci. He has also authored plays, films, and novels, and his upcoming memoir, Sing Sing Backstage, will delve deeper into his extraordinary journey behind prison walls and on stage. His work is a testament to the transformative power of the arts, with less than 3% of RTA participants returning to prison compared to a national average of over 60. Please join me in welcoming Brent Buell.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for being here, Brent.
My pleasure.
First question I have for you is, how did you get started in a program like Rehabilitation Through the Arts?
It was, it's one of those things that you look back and you just are so glad that things worked out the way they did. In the late 90s, I had been a director, producer in New York for a long time. I was getting pretty cynical about the business. I didn't feel I was accomplishing what I hoped to accomplish through theater. I had an opportunity and ended up working with Reverend Al Sharpton for 3 years on issues of around civil rights, which was a tremendous experience. It was around the murder of Amadou Diallo and Patrick Dorismond. But Reverend Sharpton always would say to me, don't follow me, do the thing you feel you're called to do. And so the beautiful opportunity came to me. My wife and I had a homeless man living with us who was organizing for homeless people. And he got a call one night. He wasn't home. I took the call. from a woman who was the head of the drama department at John Jay College. And she had invited me to come and see a show she was doing. I went, and that night asked if I would be interested in teaching theater inside Sing Sing in maximum security. And it was just like, I felt like all the pieces came together. The chance to do something I saw as really meaningful while working in the medium that I love, which is theater. So that's how it began.
Very, very cool. Question for you. Were you involved in the casting choices, including that of Paul Raci to play you?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'll tell you about the men in the film. 14 men in the film are the men that I taught. And very early in our discussions that with Greg Kwedar and Clint Bentley, they felt that they would like to meet the men that I had taught who had now come home. And I am so proud. These men who served, most of them 25 years in prison or more, some of them 30 some years, came home and were just doing remarkable things for their communities, for young people. For one of them even had become an assistant district attorney in the Bronx. The first time a man with a felony record became a district attorney. So they were just doing remarkable things. So about a year after we began discussion for the movie, my wife and I had a breakfast here at the house and invited many of the men here. Greg and Clint came to meet them. And they tell it, it's so funny. They said they came to interview these men and audition them for the movie. And about 10 minutes in, they realized they were the ones being auditioned because we were so, I was absolutely determined that we were not going to do anything that didn't honor these men. I didn't want a cheap prison movie made. I didn't want something that in some way took an easy road. I wanted the truth told. And so out of that evening is how that casting of 14 men in the film that you see are all men that I actually taught. Clarence Macklin, who plays opposite Coleman Domingo in the role
Divine Eye, right?
Divine Eye. I taught him from the day he first set foot on a stage. And it is true he was carrying a knife in his waistband, I found out later, but I didn't know it at the time. And in terms of Paul Raci, there was a whole thing. For a long time, they were planning on having me play the role. And but because of financing and other things, it became necessary to have someone who had a recognizable name, a star name. And so they had gone through various ones. Some I had said absolutely not. I said, you cast him and I'm done. But then they introduced me to Paul Raci. He became available, and it was probably a month before we started filming. And they had set up a Zoom conference with the two of us. I absolutely loved the man. And I was so impressed with the kinds of questions he asked. He then read the whole manuscript of my book. And by the time we met on set, we were just like old buddies. And so I was on set every day. And Paul and I would, have breakfast together or talk before the shoot and discuss what was coming up. So it was a really wonderful experience to have someone playing you who you felt really wanted to see who you were and give expression on screen to what you would have done or how you were without copying me. I mean, it was really a deep artistic approach that he had.
I just want to clarify, Paul Raci, many of you may have seen, he's an Oscar nominee for The Sound of Metal, which was a terrific film about a drummer in a heavy metal band who was going deaf, and he played the counselor in the film.
And he is a Coda kid. His parents were both deaf.
I was going to say that.
And Paul speaks American Sign Language fluently.
Right. Yeah, that's how he got the part in The Sound of Metal, because he lived it. He knew how to do the sign language. They didn't have to train an actor to do it. They already had one.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you get involved in this project? How did this one come to, the whole project come to be? I know there was a book it was based on, but how did the film get made and with your involvement, and how did that transpire?
So the way you see in the movie that the play came about was the men came and said, you know, we've done so many heavy dramas, can't we do a comedy? And I searched and searched for a comedy that would have roles for about 20 men and maybe 2 women. We're the only program in the country that has female actresses brought in to perform in maximum security, which is a story in itself, a wonderful story. So we couldn't find anything. I didn't want to disappoint the men. And so when I couldn't find anything, I said to them, look, I'll write it for you. And I'm not kidding. By the time I got out of the prison that night, I was drenched in sweat. I was absolutely panicked. I thought, I've promised something. I don't know if I can do this or not. But I went home, and in the next 4 days, I wrote a 145-page script called Breaking the Mummy's Code, which we did. And it was a big success. People loved it. The guys loved doing it. It had 70 roles, which were divided among about 30 performers, and was a wild, wild show. And quite fortunately, Esquire magazine assigned a reporter, not knowing what the show was going to be, but they assigned a reporter to follow all the rehearsals and write an article. And so John H. Richardson was assigned, and he came to all the rehearsals for the 5 months prior to the performance.
Wow.
And then Esquire got so excited about the show that they assigned Jake Chesham to come with him to photograph. Jake Chesham's a famous theatrical photographer. And so they did an 8-page spread in Esquire magazine.
Wow.
This is in 2005.
Yeah, that's when you wrote the play, right? That was the year you wrote the play?
The year I wrote the play and did the play. So time went by, and in 2016, 11 years later, I was getting ready to go to bed. I did a final check of my email, and there's an email that said, hi, my name's Greg Kwedar. I'm a filmmaker. We're interested in doing a film about your work. Ed knows how this is when you're a producer in New York. You get a lot of these, and I assumed it was probably a student at NYU who wanted to do some quick film and interview me for something. So I wasn't too excited. So the next day I called and found out that is Greg Kwedar, excuse me, Greg Kwedar and Clint Bentley, both very respected filmmakers, Trans-Pecos, Up from Ashes, many films that they have done. And I said, how did you, what is it you want to do? And they said, we want to do a film about the coming to be of that play you wrote. And I said, how did you hear about that? They said, we were doing a film about men training dogs to be companion dogs in a prison in Texas. And we were so affected by that process of rehabilitation that was taking place. We thought we would like to do a film that somehow embraced that. So we went to Google and we put in prison rehabilitation. And the first thing that came up was the article about you and the Esquire magazine. And they said, when we saw a madcap comedy being done in one of the darkest prisons in America in maximum security, they said, we knew we had a story. So that's how it began. And we worked for the next over 7 years on the script. And finally, Coleman Domingo came on board with us, and the script was finalized, and Black Bear Pictures financed the movie. We shot it in 2022 in the midst of COVID. Every scene that you see, everybody had a mask on until the moment the cameras rolled.
Wow.
We had about 150 people on set, and we knew if there was a single case of COVID, it would shut down production. And I'm very glad to say that even though we were working under rather strict timeline, and those of you who've made films know this. They had said to Coleman, when are you available? And he said, well, I come off The Color Purple, but then I have to go right back and do the pickup shots for Rustin. But I have 18 days. And they said, we'll take it. So we made that film in 18 days.
Wow. Yeah, that's
And
incredible.
during that time, there wasn't a single case of COVID. We never had to shut down production. The cast, the crew, everyone were so dedicated to this project. It was absolutely beautiful.
Wonderful. That's a great story. I have one more question before I let
Sure.
anyone else open up with some questions. How much of the film is based in fact? And one question I had was like, did the real Mike die in his cell?
So the answer is the story is primarily factual. The relationship of Divine I and Divine G had things added to it to make for the dramatic effect, but they had become very deep friends and encouraged one another greatly. And Divine G is a remarkable guy who really did so much to have this program successful. And so there were, all the things, including the church ladies who come in, who we thought, I mean, the superintendent called me and said, oh, we got big money coming in. And I think if you impress them, we can get new curtains. When I hear big money, I think guys in dark suits chewing on cigars. And so I thought, let's give them the wildest scene we've got. And so we did the gladiator scene. And when the guys came out on stage to do it, there were 4 elderly women sitting there looking very pious, and we nearly died. So, but we went ahead and did it. And then afterwards, we were all going, oh, this was a disaster, and we're never going to get those curtains. And the superintendent came and said, they loved it. You're going to get your curtains. So, who knows?
I want to mention that the actual real Divine G had a part in the movie where he's the one asking Coleman Domingo as Divine G to autograph the book. That was the real Divine G, in case you didn't catch that.
Absolutely. And since you're mentioning cameos, the prisoner who is auditioning for a role and says that they asked what he played, and he played an angel once, but that was when he was 3 years old. That was me.
Yes, you were in there, and you were also in at the end, dancing in the credits, I saw.
Yeah, all that video that I shot back in 2005.
Wow.
So you asked about Mike.
Great. Yes.
That is based on a true story. It happened a little differently. There was a 19-year-old young man, lovely young man, in our group. We called him Cuba, and he was in the cast in the show. And I came in for rehearsal one night. One of the men met me in the hall, and he said, you can't show any emotion or anything, or this is going to kill us all. He said, Cuba was lifting weights last night, and he collapsed, and he died, and it was a brain aneurysm. No one knew he had this congenital aneurysm in his brain. Pardon me. So I went in, the men had prepared a card to send to his family, and I had to sign the card. And then they said, let's rehearse. And I've understood that they felt that if together they all gave into their emotion, that it would have just been overwhelming to all of them. And they've told me they went back to their individual cells that night, hung up a curtain, and cried inside. He was a lovely young man, but the story of Mike is it's a real story.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Questions from Mike?
How do you get somebody in a prison like Sing Sing to join a dramatic group? I'm sure, the harassing from all their contemporaries is horrendous.
That is a wonderful question, and it's a beautiful thing that happened. The The program started in 1996. I began teaching with it in 2001. And early on, it began as a playwriting program. But then when they got plays written, they wanted to do them, and that's how it became also performance. The way that the men went about this was with such seriousness and depth that they won the respect of their fellow prisoners. By the time I came to Sing Sing in 2001, the men in that program were already like celebrities in the prison. They were so looked up to. And we had as many people in the program, sometimes 60 people in the program, and we had as many as like 100 men waiting to get in. It was that big a thing. And as the men would walk around the prison, other prisoners would come up to them and want them to say certain lines or want to say their line back to them or ask them questions about the show. At a prison named Woodburn, they started a dance program. And that one, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to see a bunch of ballerinas. Let's go see the guys in their tutus, you know. And so the program went on, the place filled up with prisoners, and some of them said they came there to laugh and to mock. It was so beautiful that within the first 2 minutes, there were men in the audience weeping. And it was never an issue after that. And again, there was a long waiting list of men waiting to get into that program. So that kind of respect that is engendered when people really give themselves to an art and do it well, translates even in a prison setting.
That's marvelous. Barbara.
I had a question in viewing the film. I really love Coleman Domingo, and I thought in a couple of places he was becoming autobiographical. And funny that you just mentioned the tutu scene. It was when he was revealing that he had gone to the School of the Performing Arts and was ostracized in his neighborhood. That was number one. And the second that I was curious about was when he was teaching his friend how to memorize lines. And I wondered if that was his actual process.
So the answer is yes, no, and yes. And here's what it is. He, in that, I think it is true that Coleman had dance training early on and suffered a good deal at the hands of neighborhood kids. But it so happens Divine G himself actually went to the High School of Performing Arts and was a dance student there as well as an acting student. And so some of those lines came from Coleman and some of them came from Divine G because they had a shared experience. And in terms of memorizing lines, I don't know whether it was, I don't know whether that was directly Coleman or not. I know that our men very often did all those techniques where they would write all their lines out. And I have this wonderful video from a different play when we did Of Mice and Men, the men that played George and Lenny, explaining that they were in a cell block that had cells that faced one another across the way. And there was a TV in the middle, but if they leaned far enough, they could see one another from their cells. And they used to rehearse their lines, yelling them back and forth across the cell block, and then accusing one another of hiding a script somewhere if they got all the lines right. It was very funny. But yeah, there are a lot of techniques that the men have, and that certainly writing out all the lines like that is one of them. And I think that the advice not to eat an elephant all at once is a great bit of advice, and Coleman certainly gave that.
Any other questions here? Amy?
Is the play open to the entire prison population to see? Who gets to see it?
Yes. We did 4 performances of each play, and the theater, which is called the Chapel at Sing Sing, there's an actual theater, and then there are 2 church wings. There's a Catholic and a Protestant church in the back. There's a mosque and a synagogue in the basement. And so we would have 400, there are 405 seats, I think, in the theater. So 405 prisoners each night for 3 nights. That would accommodate 1,500 of the men in Sing Sing. At that time, there were about 2,200 men, so not everybody got to come. And then the 4th night, we brought in about 300 civilians and about 100 men from the honor block to see it. And I am very moved to say that on that 4th night, to see people come in who had never set foot in a prison, who came from every walk of life. We had people from theater, people from Friends, other professions who came in to see the shows. They had to go through all the intense searches and everything that a person does coming into maximum security. It was a life-transforming experience for them. And I heard over and over again, I never gave much thought to those people in prison. I assumed they were just animals and deserved to be there, and I didn't think about them. And after one night, coming in, meeting those men, being able to shake their hands and speak to them and ask them questions, there was a change in how they saw. And we have friends who were, well, they represented the earlier view that I said. They were pretty hardline. And after that, it changed them so much that when Janice and I had men coming home from prison who lived with us, they would invite us to their house for dinner and wanted to know these men and came to respect them very much. And this is Ed gave that statistic that nationally 60% of people being released from our prisons are back in prison within 3 years. If that was a car factory that made cars that went defective after 3 years, 60% went defective after 3 years, we'd shut the factory down. There's something terribly wrong with what our prisons are doing. And the fact that something as simple as a theater program, not drama therapy, simply a theater program, is able to so give these men tools, and I can talk about that, give them tools to change their own lives, that only 3% have ever returned. And we've had thousands of men go through this program now.
That's amazing.
It's just an astonishing thing.
Do you think there's any potential that the people who are predisposed when they're in the prison to be in the theater program might be a different type of prisoner, that maybe they're less inclined to return to prison because they have an, I don't know, invested in the arts, are ingrained in them, or a desire to be with them, and maybe that helps make them less likely to return?
I'm really glad you asked that. You see in the movie the way Divine I is portrayed.
Yes.
It happens, that is true. And it happened over and over again. I would be leaving the prison, the superintendent, I'd get a call saying the superintendent wanted to speak to me. And I'd pick up the phone and he'd go, "Buell, I hope to God you know what you're doing. You just let the most dangerous man in Sing Sing into your program. Don't turn your back. He will stab you for a cigarette. I'm not joking with you." And I said, "He'll be fine." And I saw it over and over again. The men, there was a steering committee. There are 5 men called the steering committee, and they're the ones that reviewed the people to come into the program. They did not choose people on the basis of, oh, he's a good actor, oh, he can really sing well, whatever like that. They chose it on the basis of who needs this program the most. So it was known that the hardest, toughest, most challenging prisoners in the prison were in that program. And it's part of why they engendered so much respect, because people knew them from the yard and knew this was the guy you didn't mess with. Right. And then he came in here and suddenly he is a changed person and is working to help other people rather than to extort them. It's just like this remarkable transformation. And the reason this takes place, and I can say a whole lot about it, but I will say this. Acting, I always knew, and the process of theater, which I know Ed loves, can affect an audience. And a strong message in a play or a musical or a film can change people's minds in an audience and affect them very, very deeply. Until I got to Sing Sing, I never realized how much the process of theater could change us ourselves. And as I watched these men begin to study a role, for instance, and I'd say to them, well, what do you think your character is feeling? I don't know. Well, try and think. What do you think in this situation? Yeah. What emotions is he having? I don't know. I don't think about other people like that. Well, give it a try. You know, if you're going to play him, you're going to have to see through his eyes. You're going to actually have to become him in a way. I don't do that. I said, well, try. So little by little, they would begin to try and think and see through the other person's eyes. That's the first step in empathy. And it is the most crucial thing that a person can have. The thinking about what do other people think and feel? How real are other people? And we are so easily led to make less of other people, to make less of a group of people, to think, well, they don't matter as much. Well, they don't have to give them the same considerations as we give ourselves. They're different. We don't have to. And as the men would start to give reality to the characters they're playing, and sometimes they said, this is a character, I don't like him, I don't like what he does, but I see that there are aspects of him that are like me. I've got to change that. They began to have not only a more empathetic view of themselves, but of one another. And I'd hear men going, well, what do you think your character feels? And eventually, well, what do you feel about that? And what developed in this program was a brotherhood unlike anything that I have seen. That group of men got together and it was like a family based in love that was so encouraging. I never had conversations with other men on the outside the way I had conversations in there. There was a depth. I didn't come in and the guys go, hey, what about them Mets? What do you think they're doing? They'd go, Brent, you know, we were reading this this passage about what's happening in Washington. We wonder, what do you think about that? How should we see this? I mean, it was amazing. One night, there was a man in the group who had been rather quiet, and I think I had underestimated his intellectual capacity. And I walked by, he was reading a book, and I said, oh, what are you reading? And I'll tell him myself, I assumed that it was like a Western or something. And he said, oh, this is this amazing book. It's an argument between Schopenhauer and Hegel. And they're discussing the meaning of life. And it is so thrilling. You know, you've read it. And I was like, no, I hadn't read that. It was wonderful. And they challenged themselves intellectually. And it became one of the things that happened is the men then, many of them not having completed high school, would elect to then go back and get their GED. And then they enrolled in college. And then they enrolled in the master's program that was available at Sing Sing at the time. So many of these men left prison with master's degrees.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Did any of them, once they left prison, go into the arts, theater arts? Do you know?
Several of them had got various performances. Dino Johnson, who's the big guy that says, brothers, we're just here to become human again, in that great scene. Dino was in the movie, oh my God, The Producers. He was in some of the song and dance numbers at the end. And some of them had done various things, but there was nobody that came out just to exclusively be an actor. But I'm very happy to say that as a result of Sing Sing, Divine Eye just called me the other day from a film set in the South. He has just completed his first next feature film and is heading into his second and then a TV series, and has quite a career. Same with some of the other men now. And I'm not at liberty to say who, but they have been signed to do more work. And I'm really thrilled with that.
That's
But most
terrific.
of them are doing the other remarkable things. They're working with programs for young people. They're working in programs that assist. One is working with a program that assists with housing for men coming home for prison. There's one who is teaching at Columbia University.
Oh.
I mean,
Wow, teaching.
they are not, they have not held back. They have moved forward and done such great work. I'm really proud of them.
In Starland is the film Clarence Macklin is on now, from what I can
Yeah,
see.
he just wrapped on that.
Nice, very nice. Yes, Karen.
I think the answer to this will be no from the conversation, but were you ever afraid being in Sing Sing?
Well, I'll tell you a story about my first night there. Working with Al Sharpton, we had been arrested a number of times and put in jail at demonstrations. And so I somewhat was arrogant, thinking, I know, I've been there. I know how to deal with this. So as I went into Sing Sing, I was pretty sure, I had this down. I got through the front door, and just the attitude of the corrections officer at the front desk dissuaded me of any idea that I was going to be seen in a friendly way. They began to search us, run us through the magnetometers and things. And by the time we heard about the third big steel gate slam behind us, I knew I wasn't in a county jail. I was in a prison. So they take you in a little jitney down. Sing Sing is a big area. So they drive you down to where the schoolhouse is. And we went into the schoolhouse. I was going in with two other volunteers. When we first came in, the one volunteer got a call saying she had to go and meet the superintendent. So she said, well, you and the other volunteer go. She'll introduce you. You can speak to the men for a minute, and then we'll just take over the rehearsal. I said, fine. So the other person and I got to the schoolhouse. We were almost to the door of the classroom, and she said, oh my goodness, I forgot. I've got a meeting with the steering committee. I'll just go in and run the rehearsal, and I'll be in a while. So at that moment, yeah, I thought, oh my God, I'm here in Sing Sing in maximum security. I'm going to be going in to meet a whole room full of men. And then I thought, wait a minute, I deal with New York actors on a daily basis. This can't be any more difficult than that. So I walked into the room and I said, hi, my name's Brent. My son calls me PB. Everybody goes, hey, PB, what up? And I don't know why I did this, because normally I would begin in an acting session with some warm-up exercises, some basic things, toss the ball, whatever we were going to do to get the guys warmed up. I think I was feeling so comfortable. I said, all right, let's start with an improv. Everybody get up and just pretend that you're coming out in the yard in the morning and greeting one another. So all the men get up and start to high five one another and give a pound on the back and whatever, And after a few minutes, I said, okay, a beef breaks out. Why I would do that, I do not know. Stupid mistake. I'm thinking that maybe a couple of the guys will start to call one another names or shove one another around a little bit. Instead, out of the middle of the group, across the room from me, comes this guy. He is about 5'8", more muscle than any human being could possibly fit on a body. His eyes are locked on me like a Tomahawk missile, and he says, "You got a problem, MFer?" That's the translation. He used the original language. And he was charging right at me. And I remember thinking, he's either going to kill me or he's the best actor I've ever met. And better go with the second. So I said, "Yeah, I got a problem with you." And we slammed into one another. I remember hitting his chest and falling backwards. And we started to curse at one another, and we're circling one another, and we're just cursing one another out. And then he'd rush me and slam into me again. And I thought it went on for an hour. It probably was a minute, but it felt like a long time. It was long enough that I was running out of bad words. And I didn't want to say "gosh darn" or something. I thought that would sound so dumb. And I turned to him and I went, "Ya mama." And I heard everybody in the room just go, "Oh." And he screamed, "You're a dead man." And I saw him start to charge me, and I just closed my eyes. And I waited for him to hit, and he didn't. And then I started to hear this sound. And I opened my eyes, and the whole room was applauding. And this guy comes up, puts his arm around me, goes, "Nice work, brother. Have a chair." And he pulls a chair up under me. And that was my initiation. And I've always been so glad it happened that way. I think that it probably showed the men some of who I am, but also gave me such an opportunity to see the depth of their commitment and their kindness, because it really was. And it happens that man has become one of my closest friends to this day, and he's in the movie. He's does not look the way he did then. He's had several illnesses, but if you remember in the movie, the man who is invited in, who has been released, and he comes in and he talks about his car and his dog.
Charlie, I think.
That is Cornell Alston, my dear brother Cornell. And back then he was a formidable looking guy. And that was my first night in. So yes, I had moments that were scary.
Did you have to go through that whole process every time you went in? That whole
Absolutely.
search?
It would take, at times, it would take 2 hours just to get into the prison.
Oh my goodness.
And there, unfortunately, in our system, corrections officers have not been trained to really be empathetic with the men. It's a very top-down system. I will mention, I'm very proud, I had just finished the narration of a new movie coming out called Freedom for All. And it's a film to train superintendents and corrections officers a whole new way to approach running a prison in a more empathetic manner, where it's not just, I am great, you are nothing, but to try and have a more humanistic approach. But yeah, we had to go through it every single time. And the men would often say to me, "Man, you worked harder to get into this prison than I did," because it was intense. And one of the first nights I was in, a corrections officer cornered me. And he goes, "Why the hell are you coming in here to teach these MFers to fool us even better than they already do?" And I said, "Give me 6 months." And he goes, "You're going to make our lives miserable." So I didn't see him again. About 2 years later, I was heading from where they were building our sets down in the wood shop, which, by the way, is the old death house where the electric chair used to be. I've seen that. I was walking back, and one of the corrections officers said, "Oh, it's lunchtime. Come on in and have lunch with us." And by that time, I had been through enough with corrections officers that I did have a little feeling I'm going to dine with the enemy. I didn't, I was a little nervous about it because there had been a lot of pretty harsh situations. And, but they were very, very nice, and they shared their lunch with me and everything. And a man came over and put out his hand, and I shook it. And then he looked and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, I'm sorry, I don't. And he said, "I cornered you the first night you were in." And he said, "Brother, I just want to thank you." He said, "You have made my work so much easier." He said, "The way these guys have changed and the way we can relate with one another is so different." He said, it's remarkable." And he said, I'm so glad I have a chance to thank you in person."
Terrific. I want to get a question from Ann in.
Oh, hi. First, let me say how much I honor and respect the work that you've done. It's just tremendous.
Yeah.
But I have two questions for you. One, you were a volunteer, so I'm wondering how often you met with this group. And also, if you could, I was curious about the two women, how they were able to participate.
Okay. So first of all, I would say we did 2 shows a year. So at the beginning, I would go in and teach acting classes. It might be an improv class. There were other people teaching other things, but basic acting 101 classes to get new men up to speed. And then when we began working on a show, I would go in once a week to teach those classes and to start rehearsals. And as time went on, I would go up twice a week to do to run rehearsals, and the men would have time on their own to rehearse in between. But up about 3 weeks or a month before the actual performance, I actually would move up to Ossining and stay with friends. It happened the mayor of Ossining was a friend of mine, so I was able to stay there, or some other people would let me stay up there. And I would be in the prison 6 days a week, 13 hours a day. And they did a thing called out count, where the men could not have to, usually they have to go, they get out of their cell, they go to breakfast. They have to go back to their cell, and there's a count at 11 o'clock. Then they leave their cells, they can go out to the yard, but they have to come back and go to their cell at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to be counted again. And then after that, they can go to dinner, and then they have to be back in their cell at 11 o'clock for the count at night. So 3 times a day, they have to be counted. So because they wanted us to be able to rehearse, they actually let the men stay in the theater from morning all the way to night, and they did the counts right there in the theater. And it was funny because the corrections officer they'd have the men all sit in the seats, and then they go through and count, and then they'd confer and figure if everybody was present. And one time they kept coming up with the wrong number, and I could see they were very, very puzzled. And finally, one of the guys said, "Brent, you're sitting with us. They're counting you." And I was the one throwing off the count.
Well,
So,
they off that direction as opposed to something missing.
Right.
yeah, they had an extra. They didn't know why. And your second question, just remind me.
Two women.
The women.
The two women.
The two
I was
women.
curious about how the two women were able to participate in the production.
We had women volunteers teaching the entire time. Catherine Vokins is a person that founded the program. There was another woman, Sister Joanna Chan. She is a Maryknoll nun from China, who's one of the most remarkable people I ever met. When I heard a nun was going to be coming as a volunteer, I thought it meant, we'd have to really watch everything we said and did, and it would be uncomfortable, but she was just amazing. She's an accomplished playwright and director. She was the head of the Hong Kong National Theater for many years, had directed huge shows. In fact, with this show, with 70 roles to do and all the costume changes constantly backstage, I was a little overwhelmed. And she said, Brent, she said, let me take care of the backstage. She said, my last production at Hong Kong, we had 250 players, so this is not difficult at all. So she ran that for me. But the actresses that came in also were, and all of us had to go through the same programs as volunteers. It was, you took classes about being a volunteer. And I will say they were very unfortunate classes, because essentially what we were told is you're about to go in and meet hardened criminals, animals who will take advantage of you if they know anything about you. Don't tell them anything other than your first name. Don't tell them anything about your life. And I'm thinking, how can I direct a person in a deep way and not participate with them as a human being? And so I didn't do that. I didn't follow the instructions, thank God. And same with the other people who came in. They treated these men as the human beings they were, and in turn, they treated us with great respect. And the actresses who would come in, I remember more than once leaving the prison and an actress crying and saying, why can't I find a guy on the outside that treats me as respectfully as these guys do? It was constant, because they really were so appreciative of these women and the fact that they treated them like their sisters. I mean, with great respect. And so we would have, usually we had probably 2 or 3 women who taught classes. But then for the shows, we usually had 2 or 3 actresses who came in. And they were vetted in the same way. They went through the same training, had to go through all the same search procedures and everything that everybody else did. But they were wonderful. And the shows were really good because of them, you know?
The COs in the film, there was just really a brief scene towards the beginning when they're lining up, prisoners are lining up, and there's a yelling back and forth with one of the COs. Other than that, they're practically non-existent in the film. Can you talk about the choice of portraying or not portraying them, really?
From the beginning, we wanted this film to really represent what took place in the theater program itself, without sugarcoating what goes on in prison. But as you know, most prison films accent the violence and the abusive behavior one way or another. And so we didn't want anything like that. And there's enough that you know that there's, outside of those walls, there's a hostile environment. When Coleman's out feeding the geese in the yard and the emergency alarm goes off and he has to drop to the ground, those are just things that happen constantly. Our choice was to focus on these men working to better their lives. We didn't want to do something that in any way denigrated the prison staff. They have very difficult jobs too. It happens that one of the men playing a corrections officer actually is a corrections officer. And in the course of the filming, we became good friends. He's a very interesting man. And he called me, I guess maybe a month after we wrapped filming, and he said he wanted to talk. And he told me that in the course of making the movie, what he saw and what he witnessed had so changed the way he saw his job that he went back to the superintendent at his prison and said he wanted to do something different and requested to be the head of education programs for the prison, because he said he saw the men so differently. He couldn't just see them in the harsh way that he had seen them before, and wanted to do something to give back and better their lives. So, and that's what he's doing now. So it's an excellent thing.
Right. So Coleman Domingo, are any of you familiar with seeing him in other films?
No. Yeah, that'd be Rustin.
Rustin? Okay,
On television.
right.
And now the Four Seasons.
The
Yeah.
Four Seasons,
Blackbird.
on the
Oh, yeah.
He's in the project.
the Four Seasons with Tina Fey.
Playing very gay on that.
Yes.
Have you seen Rustin? where he
Yeah.
played.
A couple of people here,
Yeah.
yes, for saying
Yeah.
that. Right. So I first saw him, and you'll get a kick out of this, way back in 2008 in Passing Strange on Broadway.
Okay.
He played a bad guy in
Yeah.
that, but he was very good. And then I saw him shortly after in the Scottsboro Boys in the very limited run it had on Broadway. And people don't know that he can sing and dance really, really well. Which
He really can.
he
He's
got a little dancing scene here in the film, but not much. But he's very capable of doing that. So I thought that's it's not
He's a
and
triple-
a
he's a
lot
triple
more
threat.
role. Yes, right, triple threat.
He was a star at the
And-
Met Gala.
It happens. He's also one of the
The whole thing was
nicest.
done around that.
He's
yes.
one of the nicest, most genuine people. I really feel it's a privilege to know him because he's just he's very real, has been so supportive of the film, of the men, and has just shown himself to be a real friend.
Nice. I saw there's a couple of fun trivia things. So that the character of Mike was played by Sean San Jose, who's been Coleman Domingo's real life friend for nearly 15 years. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
They began doing theater together in San Francisco, and doing like political theater in San Francisco, and are friends all these years later. He's another just great guy.
And Coleman Domingo was also in the film version, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Oh, yeah.
And earlier in this film, Divine G suggests they do a play by August Wilson, who wrote Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then there was a nice story, and I'm trying to see where it was. Oh, in Variety. Okay. In the end of March, and Variety had a story about the San Quentin Film Festival. It says to return to Bay Area prison for a second year, and that there was producers doing a master class for incarcerated men. And Clint Bentley and Greg Kwedar were there doing that, and actually hosting the first event in the series. So they were doing a 6-hour filmmaking workshop about crafting movie scenes on 16mm films. And Sean San Jose was there as well.
That is a wonderful thing. There's a woman named Corey Thomas that began this, and she is a powerhouse. And it happens, we always hear of San Quentin as we hear of Sing Sing, and have very dark connotations. It happens they're two of the prisons in the country that have the most programs, San Quentin being even more progressive than Sing Sing. And they started this program, which now has culminated in the men actually making films themselves inside the prison, and then having a film festival of those films. And that's what Greg and Clint took part in helping the men who were making the films, training them and showing them things about filmmaking, teaching them things. And that, yes, as you said, that has been renewed and is going to happen again this coming year.
Right. I think that's terrific. And in the interview in Variety, Clint and Greg both said how this film, Making Sing Sing, changed their lives. So it's not only the prisoners' lives who are changing. I think that's pretty impressive.
It changed us all. And one of the things when they first asked to do this film, first time we met, I just said, I have two demands. One is that this be authentic and not be a typical prison movie that exaggerates the violence and things of prison. And two, it cannot be a white savior story, because I said the absolute opposite is the truth. I said, those men saved me. And it's true, because I was so cynical about theater until I started going in there. And theater there was because of the art, because of the love, because of what it did. It wasn't just about the bottom line and making money and recouping. It was about the art, and it restored my love of theater. and just gave me the love of my life back. So I'm very, very grateful to these men, and feel that in the years of knowing them and watching them change, my belief in the ability of human beings to be kind to one another in harsh circumstances, to be empathetic, to make decisions that are in behalf of one another, not just selfish decisions. I really believe in that capacity of human beings. And it's because of those men and what I watched in there.
Remarkable. I remember when I first met you, which goes back to about, I'm guessing, 2010, 11, somewhere around there.
Probably, yeah.
At True, at Theater Resources Unlimited.
Yeah.
And you told me what you were doing with the prisons. And I said to you, that sounds like that would make a great project, a theater or film project. And you said, well, you never know, something like that, because I think you already had the idea too. But I thought
I probably said, well, Ed, you're a producer. Why don't you make it?
Yes, Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are you still participating in the program? What's happened with it now?
The program now has expanded. They're now in 10 prisons. It is run now entirely by men who are graduates of the program. Jermaine Archer is the new executive director. Charles Moore is the head of programs. They're really doing such a beautiful job with it. I am not teaching inside right now. I began to do a lot of work with men returning home from prison. My wife and I have had men come and live with us, and done a lot of work in learning about this transition process, which is, that's a whole education in itself. What men go through when they're, you know, we all go, oh, great, you got out of prison. Hooray, welcome home. Let's have a party. Welcome home. They're not feeling like that. It's the roadblocks that are put in their way and the things that are done to trip them up and have them return to prison are immense. And I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity firsthand to learn about it and be able to be useful. But we've got to change. There's so much we have to change to make this process, both prepare people to come home, but then when they come home, make it easier for them. The matter of just trying to get a simple thing like your Social Security card and your driver's license. And one man came home. He'd been in prison for 28 years. He's living with my wife and me. We go to the DMV with the identification card that they gave him in the prison, and to get his New York State identification card. Well, you can't get that because you need your original birth certificate and your Social Security card. And he said, well, I know my Social Security number, but the prison lost my Social Security card. Well, you'll have to go to Social Security and get that. So we drove to Social Security, and when you get to Social Security, they go, well, we can't issue that until you show us your New York State identification. It took us 5 months of back and forth to finally have him get his identification. The last time that he went in, there was a different person at the desk, and she goes, why do you keep coming back? And he goes, well, because I had to get this, this, and this, and other papers that they told him. She said, you had everything you needed the first day you were here.
Oh.
So the person was just jerking him around because they knew he was a guy coming home from prison, and let's just give him a hard time.
That's terrible.
So we have a lot of things a lot of issues to deal with and get things changed for these people. And it doesn't mitigate at all what they did to get into prison. I'll mention one other thing. When we were doing Of Mice and Men, one of the men was a wonderful artist, and I asked him to design the poster for Of Mice and Men. And when he brought it to me, it was beautiful, but it was a single man sitting at an outdoor fire in front of a barn. And I said, you know, it's a beautiful picture, but you realize there are two main characters in Of Mice and Men, right? And he goes, look more closely. And I looked at it, and the shadow of the man sitting in front of the fire was cast up onto the barn as this huge looming shadow. And he said, Brent, he said, both are there. He said, nearly all of us here carry a body on our back for life. It's always there. It's something we can never get away from, that we took a life. And he said, that picture represents that to me. And that's what Of Mice and Men is about.
Wow.
Prison is a big business. People make money for those guys laying in that bed. And they don't want to let them out. And when they get them out, they want them to go back in. And
You
we
hit
got-
it on the head.
Prison is unbelievable. This GEO company, bunch of corrupt bums.
Securus
Yes.
and JPay are two horrible companies. To correspond with the man in prison, you send him, quote, an email through this company. It's 30 cents per page to send it. If you want to send a photograph, it's 30 cents. If you want to send a video, it's $5 or something for 30 seconds.
Well, it was also to make a phone call, you had to pay, $10, $20 a phone call, whatever.
Every single thing that they do. And when they got, in 2012, when they got the contract to do this, they built into it eliminating in-person visits. And so now men no longer can meet directly with their family. They have a tablet like an iPad, and they see their family on there. It's $25 for a 30-minute visit. And that's the only way they see their families. And these companies are raking in millions and millions and millions of dollars. The gentleman who said that, it's true. The people who have the toilet paper contracts for the prisons are making millions of dollars. The food contracts are making millions of dollars. Everything is, and they want to keep the population up. And just like he said, he couldn't have said it better.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I want to mention there's a phenomenal article. I don't know if you saw it in Deadline by Antonia Blythe in February. Did you see that article?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're mentioned in it where Greg says, we had a lot of accountability structure, the real Brent Buell, Divine I and Divine G, who would read these things and hold us to a higher standard. So, so thank you so much for coming, Brent.
You're so welcome. Thank you all very much. This was a great experience.
That was great.